Let's get started on our lesson today. This is one of my favorite stories, the story of Joseph. I could preach on Joseph for a week probably, or a month or a year or something like that, but I probably wouldn't even need to use notes. This one's one of my favorites. And it's going to be hard for me not to tell next week's story, because it all comes together. It's to me, the story of Joseph and his part in God's plan is one of the most obvious and visible representations of God's plan throughout a historical period. If you ever wonder why things are happening, why do these things happen, and you don't know, if you want a faith story, this is the one. Because you see from beginning to the end, and even past the end, of what God was doing. You didn't see it at the first, you didn't see it as was moving along, but in the end, as you look back and you see how the Hebrew people, where they ended up, then you look back and you see how God has meticulously put all these pieces together. And it wasn't always pleasant for some people, and Joseph in particular. He had a rough time. Has anybody? I'll tell you what. Let's pray first. Charles Lee, let's have a prayer, and then we'll. Before I get started, I may never stop.
Father, we come to you just now and ask you to be with Brother Darrell here as we start our lesson, and we just give you all the praise. And we thank you for this weather that we've been having. We ask that you be with those that are on our prayer list and continue to watch over this congregation and help us to do your will. The things that we learn from the different lessons, most of them we can apply today in 2022. Father, we ask for your guidance. Give you all the praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Darrell, I've often wondered about his parents. He told God was going to be with him and stuff, but he wasn't an old man. He was just a kid.
Yeah.
And when he got sold, and how many of us could stick at the faith that guy had, everything that seemed to be going against him.
Yeah. What's one of the hardest things for us to get over? What is one of the hardest things for us to turn loose of?
One of the things is the betrayal of his family.
One of the hardest things for us to get rid of, at least for me, and from what I can tell, it's pretty much universal, is resentment. When someone has done something wrong, when we've been wronged, when we've been stabbed in the back, particularly by somebody that we trust, somebody that we looked up to, somebody that we were friends with, maybe a family member, somebody that really threw us under the bus, and it makes us in particularly angry, and I think it lasts longer when the person that did the offending isn't offended. Doesn't bother them, because we want them to be mad. We want to be able to, kind of have it out. But they're done with it, and we're still holding the grudge. We're still holding the animosity, and that's hard.
Or being kind of betrayed by someone that you thought so much of.
Yeah.
And you thought
And just think of this: your older brothers, all of your older brothers, who are supposed to be taking care of you, you know, you're supposed to be able to trust your older siblings, right? For the most part, you would think. That wasn't the case with Joseph. And if anybody had a right to be upset or to hold a grudge, it would be Joseph. There's another one. There's another person in that family a generation or two back, as I just happened to think of it, who had every reason to hold a grudge. This is a bonus question here. Who was Joseph's dad? Jacob. Who had?
He had to serve all the
Well, who?
Laban.
Who had a? Yeah, but what about Jacob and Esau? Esau. If anybody had a right to have a grudge, it would be Esau, right? And remember when Jacob went off after a while, and he kind of had his own families, and he saw Esau coming, and what did he do? Put his family out front, put the women and children out front. You guys going out, and if he's still mad, I'll know it before he gets to me. As it turned out, Esau had kind of let time heal the wounds, and he wasn't mad at him anymore. But he had every right to be. For me, that's one of the toughest things. If somebody, I may forgive, but I don't. It's hard to forget. I may intellectually and spiritually, I may forgive, but I don't know sometimes if it actually works on the heart.
But you know, Daryl, Jacob, the way he treated Joseph and Benjamin to a degree, that fueled all that.
Well, you can't say that. I mean, we can understand where the brothers came from, right? I mean, if you've had a younger brother, which I had 2 of them, and they can get under your skin sometimes, and you feel like selling them off to slavery, for sure. Anyway, let's read from Genesis chapter 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all of its people. So when Joseph, let's just set the table just a little bit. I know you guys know the story, but just to kind of make sure we got it. Joseph last week answered, as Jim taught, he interpreted the dream that Pharaoh had, that his magicians couldn't, and his prophesiers couldn't interpret. And it was that the land of Egypt was going to have 7 years of plenty. They were going to have plenty of good crops to store away, and then there were going to be 7 years of famine. Now, was that famine just Egypt area?
This covered a large area.
Yeah. And here's God's providence that we're going to see is that not only did this prophecy, not only did God bless Egypt with plenty so that they could store up the grain for Egypt, but as we'll see, as you already know, the whole area, that part of the world had a famine for that period of time. And God in his providence made Egypt the recipient of blessings so that others could be taken care of in their time of need as well. So,
Just reflects.
yeah.
We can talk about this and reflect on how we, what Jesus has asked us, we have.
And here's the thing that impresses me about every time I read this is that how God already knows what's going to happen, and he puts things in place to be ready for those things. It's just amazing to me. So anyway.
And also by now, being governor, he only had to answer to the Pharaoh himself.
Yeah, he was.
Very
It says he's the governor, but that's not really a good description of. He was second in charge. In fact, you could argue he was the second most powerful person in the world at that point, because Egypt was the world power at that time, at least in that area. And so it says, when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him. Why did they come?
buys grain.
Yeah, they're out of food.
They're out of the
Jacob said, take some money, because they had money. They didn't have food. take your brothers, go down to Egypt, take all the donkeys, take some people with you. They had an entourage. It wasn't just like the brothers went down there. There was, all the servants and everybody that went with them, and they took all the donkeys and whatever they were going to load up and took it all down there with the money to buy grain. And I'm sure they weren't the only people doing that. Obviously, people coming from all over that part of the world to get grain. It says that when they arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Why did they bow down?
Well, for one thing, they didn't recognize Joseph as a brother. He recognized them.
Yeah. What? Excuse me? Yeah, it's a symbol of we're recognizing your sovereignty, your power, your. It would be like us going before a judge, Your Honor, saying Your Honor, those kind of things. We don't much bow down anymore. In many countries, many cultures, when you meet somebody, you'll bow your head as a matter of respect. We tend not to do that. In fact, several years ago, when our leader did that, we kind of got on him because typically Americans don't bow to anybody. That's neither here nor there, but these guys did, just out of showing respect, showing honor to Joseph, not because he was a god or they were worshiping or anything like that. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Now, we're going to find out later that not only did he talk harshly to them, but what else did he do to hide who he was? He had an interpreter. He spoke to them in the language, whatever Egyptian language is. He didn't speak to them in Hebrew, although he could have. Also, let's, what other kinds of physical attributes did, let's say, the Hebrews have that perhaps the Egyptians didn't have or didn't observe?
Different clothing.
Well, obviously the clothing was different, yeah.
If we go back several passages, I know Joseph came before all the people of Egypt that had their heads all shaved and everything, whereas
Yeah. Particularly a beard. You would think Hebrews, they almost always were unshaven. Egyptians are the other way. They would either be unshaven or at least have their beards trimmed fairly closely. I don't know if you've ever watched movies, if you've watched the Ten Commandments or anything like that, and you look at the Egyptians, they got makeup on, they have their eyes painted and stuff like that. So I don't know if how much of that's true or legend or whatever, but anyway, he would have looked like an Egyptian. It's been 20 years. It's been 20 years since the time when he was sold into slavery. The last time they saw Joseph was 20 years ago or close to it. And he's become an Egyptian. He speaks Egyptian. He looks like an Egyptian. As the song said, he walks like an Egyptian. But he recognized them, right? Because the last image in his brain of his family was these guys. 10 of them. And they he never forgot that. I can guarantee you that. But they wouldn't have recognized him. And he spoke harshly to him. Why do you think he spoke harshly to him? Two possibilities, I guess, maybe more, but two that come to my mind. I think one is he didn't want to give away who he was. He wanted to put on this front of being the powerful, ruler. A second is, this is just me talking, he's probably playing with him a little bit. He's not, I don't think he's trying to be spiteful to him, but I think he's playing with him a little bit. They're not getting off free. So anyway, he says, verse 8 rather, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them, and he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." When it says he remembered his dream, What did he remember?
Probably the dream where they were supposed to bow down.
Exactly. Except this wasn't exactly fulfilled because in the dream, all of his brothers bowed down in front of him, and all of his brothers weren't here. Right?
Yep.
Still one at home.
Father kept thinking,
Still one at home. Yep.
He was his second favorite.
So anyway, again, Joseph's playing with them. I think, you're spies. You've come to find out where we're unprotected. You've come to find out where our weakness is. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. We're all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. I don't know why that. Why would you say that? I mean, why would you say we're all the sons of one man? To me, that doesn't make any sense. So I think that's kind of God working His plan here, so that so that they get the story. Joseph gets the story from him. Anyway, no, he said to them, you've come to see where our land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers. See, again, I don't know why they have to tell that story, but maybe he's wondering why there are 10 of you. No, we're all the same. We're all brothers. We're all the sons of one man. Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. Well, when you say one is no more, what is that? He's gone. Yeah, the lions ate him up. At least that's what they told her dad, right? They came home with his bloody clothes and everything. Said, "Well, sorry, Dad, he's gone." So they're still hanging on to that story. That's their story, and they're sticking to it. And he says, Joseph says to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives," and he says this twice, by the way, "as surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother, and the rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you're telling the truth. If you're not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." And he put them all in custody for 3 days. Now let's just analyze this a little bit. First of all, he's playing with them, I think. You guys are spies. As sure as Pharaoh lives. Now that's a vow, that's a threat. He's invoking, because Pharaoh was considered to be a god. So he's kind of making a threat to them. Look, I'm saying that as sure as Pharaoh lives, if you guys are not telling me the truth, again, I think he's playing with them a little bit, but he wants to see the integrity of their story as well. I think he wants to see if they've changed, if they've had a change of heart. I think he's not only looking to play with them a little bit, but I also think he's trying to find out, are you the same guys that you were 20 years ago? What is your character like today? Because based on what I find out about your character, that's how I'm going to deal with you. And I think it's interesting that at first he says, I want you to send one of your brothers back, and I want you to bring your younger brother. Now, only Joseph would know why he would want to see his younger brother. The other brothers are so discombobulated because of this whole situation that it doesn't even register to them. Why would he want to see our younger brother? Why would he even care? So now he says, put one of your brothers, I want you to send one of them back and get your younger brother. The rest of you guys, the other 9 of you, you're going to stay here in jail for a while. And it says he left them there for 3 days. What do you think they were thinking about during those 3 days?
It really demonstrates to them other brothers the power that he had. You know, I just imposed a sentence right there.
Don't you bet? Do you think that anybody of the 9 brothers said, God is now finally punishing us for what we did? Do you think in 20 years they've ever forgotten that?
I doubt it.
I don't think so. I don't think God would let him forget it, number one. But they, Skip, that's exactly, yep. You're right. Those are the same prison that Joseph spent some time in. It says house arrest, kind of, but a couple of translations that kind of indicated it was more like house arrest. But I don't know. Skip might be right. He may have thrown him down there where he was for a while. I don't know that they were expecting to get out, or if the plan was to send one of them back and get the other brother and come back, how long is that going to take? That's not a short journey. You can't hop on a bus and get there in a couple days, right? That's going to be, we're talking weeks, maybe months, to go back, get your brother, get some more stuff, and come back. So they're not just planning to stay. They don't expect they're going to be there for 3 days. They think that they're there for a while.
Just curious, why is 3 days? It's not just there. It's in so many other scriptures. Of,
Yeah.
Jonah in the well, Jesus in the tomb.
Yeah.
3 has some number. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it ought to be something.
3 is a pretty holy number. It's Father, Son, the Holy Spirit.
There you go.
Those have always, when the angels and when the hosts, the elders around the throne, Amen, Amen, Amen. 3 is 3 and 7, pretty much the holy numbers. I mean, there's some others, 40 days. You see 40 a lot. But anyway, it's a good question. So he says, I'm going to keep you here for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, do this, and you will live, for I fear God. Why would he say that? What does that mean?
I wonder what this meant to them, because they're looking at him as an Egyptian who has many gods. Here he's giving them this, that he fears going through the wilderness.
This word, and I had to spend some time looking at this as well, and I think in the lesson, the person who wrote the study guide indicates that the word that's used here, not necessarily Jehovah God. It could mean their God, the one God. It could also mean all gods. It could mean many gods. So he could have meant, I fear Yahweh, but he didn't specifically say that name, which would have given him away. Because why would an Egyptian care about Yahweh? Why would he even know that name? But he said, I do fear God, whether it was God's or a supreme God. He said, that's the reason that I'm doing this. I fear God. So, because of that, he said, if you do this, he said, and he doesn't say you're honest men, he said, if you're honest men. See, I think he's still not convinced that they've necessarily changed their stripes. He's going to find out whether they have or not. He said, if you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison. He's had a change of heart over 3 days, right? Let one of your brothers stay here in prison. The others of you go back and bring back your younger brother. He says, if you're honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. Bring your younger brother to me so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. And this they proceeded to do. So Joseph has had time to think about it, and now he's changing his plan a little bit. Now instead of 9 brothers going back, or staying, and 1 brother going back, he has decided to just let one of them stay. Now he's going to stay in prison. And I bet he's telling his brothers, don't take all day. Do what you got to do. Get on your horse and get there and get back. And I think that's probably. I like this next paragraph, and this kind of is a hint to kind of what we were talking about just a minute ago. They said to one another, "Surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come on us." So here are the brothers. They haven't forgot about it. Surely God is doing this because of what we did. And I bet it's not the first time they've had this conversation. I bet every time some sort of distress happens in their family or to them personally. And I mean, all of us have, at least I imagine all of us have had those occasions where we had the chance to stand up and stop an injustice or stop some wrong, and we didn't. Or maybe we did something wrong ourselves that we're ashamed of, and even though God's forgiven us, and even though we accept His forgiveness, when something goes wrong, what's the first thing that we think?
This is happening to us because we did. God's getting
He's still paying me back. And unfortunately, that flies in the face of what we know about grace. But these guys they haven't repented. They haven't made things right yet. They're still loaded down with guilt. There's a great powerful lesson here. These guys are loaded down with guilt, and they have been for 20 years. And so there's no peace, there's no joy, there's no sense of being made right, because they haven't made things right yet. And in their mind, they can't. They don't know what happened to Joseph. For all they know, he's dead. For all they know, he was a slave, and he died of consumption or some sort of thing while he was a slave. They couldn't, in their wildest dreams, even though Joseph told them, this dream says you guys are going to serve me at some point. They just thought that was, a kid, with fantasies. They never, even now that they're in front of this guy, I'm sure that not one of them thought this is the dream.
Way Joseph using an interpreter.
Yeah.
And yet he really understood everything.
Yeah, and he may not have heard Hebrew for 20 years either. I don't know. I expect back and forth over the years there's been somebody come in, to the palace or been in front of him that was a Hebrew, but that's his native language, but he probably hadn't spoken it much for 10 years. But he understood every word they were saying, for sure. Surely we're being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was. Joseph was not only pleading for his life, he was brokenhearted because his brothers were treating him like that. And, the next thing's going to talk about Reuben. Reuben says, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen." Now, is Reuben trying to make himself, be the hero here? Is he saying, "I tried to stop you guys, but you were going to do what you were going to do," or you think he was right in the middle of it?
We always like passing the blame on something.
Well, yeah, but he's the older brother.
Yeah.
He's the oldest brother.
Even in theory, back in those days, he was the one that really was in charge.
The other brothers, had Reuben stepped up, the other brothers would not have, probably, as far as, like Ronnie says, as far as the tradition is concerned, the older brother holds sway over the others. Had he stopped up and been forceful, they probably wouldn't have done what they did. But in Joseph's mind, at least, he hears this, and at least he says, well, at least Reuben was on my side. Because he hadn't got any reason, Reuben hadn't got any reason to say that if it wasn't true. I mean, he hadn't got any reason to say that in front of Joseph. So at least Joseph is now hearing what Reuben says. And why is that maybe important? How did that get Reuben out of trouble? Well, when they left, who was the one left behind? Wasn't Reuben. Who was the guy left behind? Simeon. The number 2 brother. The second oldest brother. So the speculation is that if Reuben hadn't said this, it might have been Reuben who got to stay in jail while the others went back. But because Reuben helped out, maybe Joseph had a kind of a change of heart and said, okay. Or it may have been that Joseph wanted the oldest brother to be the one representing the rest of the family as they go back, because Joseph knows they're going to have this conversation with Jacob. You know, Joseph knows he was the favorite son. They knows Benjamin was right behind him. And why is that? Because of what? Youngest, and who was his mom?
Yeah, different wife.
Rachel. Rachel was Jacob's favorite, right? And these were Benjamin and Joseph were the offspring of Rachel. So they were not only was Joseph the favorite, but their mom was the favorite. And boy, if you want a lesson on parenting, this is not a good one. And if we go back even further, Rachel wasn't a great parent either, because she pitted Esau and Jacob against each other and helped Jacob out and not Esau. So in Israel, I mean, Jacob was, I mean.
It does teach not to do favoritism.
Yeah, that's not a good idea to have favorites as far as your kids are concerned, or your grandkids. I found that out too. So maybe Reuben was spared because Joseph wanted the head of the boys, the oldest one, to go back and tell Jacob what needs to happen. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and began to weep. But then he came back and spoke to them again. And he had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Now we're going to find out that Joseph weeps more than just this time, right? I wish we had time. Excuse me. Can't get that cleared out. We're going to find out later when they come back that Joseph is going to, again, have a conversation with them, and it's going to cause him to be emotional again. Why do you think he was emotional?
He might have sensed that they did have some remorse, because he could hear things that they didn't know he could hear in their conversation.
What'd you say, Mike? Because they're family.
I think he realized that all these things, which comes in next week's lesson, all these things were what part of God's plan. And I think he's beginning to see this as these facts unfold from his family coming back and having an opportunity to save the whole nation.
Yeah, I think we're going to find, as you, we'll get too deeply into next week's lesson, but I think he weeps differently now from what he will next time. Now, I think he is, and again, I'm just speculating, I don't know, the word doesn't say, but guess is he's just overcome with emotion because of this event, because of this situation. Here are brothers that he had harbored a resentment about, and God, he said, I believe in God, had brought them here in front of him, and he had had the opportunity to, as Ronnie said, hear their remorse over what they had done. The second time they come before him, see, he's going to, again, I don't know how many weeks or months it was from the time that they left and went back to the time that they came down and were in front of him again. But he had had time then to reflect on God's plan. I don't know that he could yet. I'll clear this out. I don't know what's. Ronnie, I probably could lead singing today. I'm like Ronnie, trying to get this cleared out. But anyway, I don't know at this point he had had time to reflect on that. But over the next few weeks or month or however long, I believe he's thinking about and anticipating. He doesn't know whether Benjamin's going to come back. And then what happens after he brings Benjamin back? Then they send him back one more time, right? And what for? Bring Dad back. And that is just the start. That's just the start of God's plan for the Hebrew people. That's what's amazing to me. There's going to be a period of 400 years from the time that Jacob's family comes down to Egypt, to the time when they leave again. There's going to be generation after generation after generation that are going to be there. But what we see is, had that not happened, had the famine not happened, had Israel not been needing grain, Moses doesn't happen. The Exodus doesn't happen. The Ten Commandments don't happen. Well, they do. We all know they would have. But what I'm saying is, it wouldn't have happened in that fashion. It would have been somebody else's story. And that's a really important point as well, isn't it? God has given each of us a ministry. God has given each of us, he has a plan. We're here because of circumstances that brought us to this place, just like Joseph is where he was because of circumstances that brought him to this place. I'm here because of unimaginable circumstances that happened previous to my getting here that I only saw in retrospect. And the things that God has worked through me and us to happen would have happened if it were somebody else instead of me. Because God has a plan. And Jonah could have not done God's will, right? What would have happened? Who would have saved Nineveh? Somebody else would have. If it wasn't him.
Think of the opportunity. If we had.
I think that's the story. That's what if it wasn't Joseph, it would have been somebody else. Why do we know it was going to be Joseph, though? Because God is not bound by time. He sees into the future. He knows what's going to happen. He orchestrates things to happen in some cases. In some cases, he takes what's happened and orchestrates them to his will. But his plan is not going to be thwarted. His plan is always going to be carried out, whether I do it or not. Now, the problem is, if I don't carry it out,
The opportunity that we lose.
I lose the blessing. I lose the reward. right? Somebody else gets the reward that I would have gotten had I followed God's plan, had I done what he had set out for me to do. Joseph was rewarded greatly because and that's one of the things that we see in this story, he got to be number 2 he got to be Pharaoh's right-hand man because he was faithful from the time he was a child, from the time he told the stories that he told, interpreted the dreams that he interpreted. He didn't fall away from them. He just said, look, this is the dream. I don't care if you throw me in the pit. I'm not going to say it was a lie. I'm not going to say I made it up.
And that, that's the great faithfulness that he had. And holding on to the faith, which, is a great example
Yeah.
for all of us.
Well, and here's the thing. I think that's why these stories are so important. I think it's why, there's an interesting passage. I know I pointed it out when we studied Romans, but there's let me see if I can find it. Because it was just such a revelation to me. I don't know why it just jumped out of the page at me, but it did. Paul says, in his very first chapter, I long to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers. I plan to come to you many times. I'm obligated both to the Greeks and the non-Greeks. Here it is. Verse 14, chapter 1. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to those wise and foolish. That is why I'm eager to preach the gospel also to you who are at Rome. Let me just end with that point. Paul says, I want to come to Rome so that I can preach the gospel to you. Who's he going to preach the gospel to? Is he going to preach the gospel to unbelievers? No. He has an interest, an overwhelming desire to come to the believers at Rome and preach the gospel to them. We think of preaching the gospel means we're preaching repent, be baptized, and be saved to people who haven't heard it before. Paul says, I'm going to preach the gospel to the people who are already saved, right? These stories that we know and have known since we were 5 years old, 4 years old, we know the story of Joseph, but we need to keep reading these accounts because it gives us faith. When we're in the same position that these people are, we look and see how God dealt with them, and we have faith that he will do the same with us. So those are the reasons I like to continue to explore these biblical characters, because they tell me about my story. If God worked that way for Joseph, why wouldn't he work that way for me?